I'm Doug DeNatale. I'm the program director of the Arts Administration program here at Boston University. And I'm really delighted to be having this conversation with Michael Bobbitt, the executive director of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, who I think is one of the real thought leaders in the field today. And really wonderful to have this opportunity to talk with you, Michael, and just share reflections on what the current state of the arts is, both here in the state and in the nation. And also to talk about what the future may hold and what future arts leaders need to be prepared to face that future.
So, solving all the world's problems.
Solving all the world's problems.
Thanks, Doug. It's good to be back in the room with you always.
Great. So let's start with the pandemic, which of course had a huge impact on the field. We're now several years away from the shutdowns. And from where you sit, what do you see as being the lasting impact of the pandemic in the field?
Yeah, and I think in my own career, I've always taken crises as opportunities, especially those that really make us think about our business models and the way we do our work. What can we learn from those? How can we improve on what we've learned during that time? Just some facts for people. Americans for the Arts reported in 2020 that the arts sector faced a $15 billion revenue loss. The National Endowment for the Arts reported that 63% of the artists experienced unemployment. Brookings Institute showed that audience attendance plummeted, with many arts organizations closing their doors permanently. And then minority-led arts organizations were disproportionately impacted, just like it is in every other sector, and that was reported by Grants Makers for the Arts. I also think that the digital pivot was a big divide in our arts sector. Many people had the resources to pivot quickly. But I think the lasting impression really goes back to the things that make us vulnerable to things like pandemics. Most art is consumed in buildings, and the pandemic said, no, we can't do that. And so what the art sector has, and I should say the nonprofit art sector has in many ways failed to do, is to think about how does it extend beyond its walls. It also, let me stay on that point for a minute. One of the things that has impressed me about sports is when sports started streaming into people's homes, it made it so much more accessible. And the sports industry benefited greatly from being able to come directly into people's homes. Everyone has a front row seat, and we didn't glom onto that. Even though we have great examples, we have things like the Oscars and the Tonys and concerts that stream to people's homes, the sort of nonprofit arts world hasn't really picked up on the digital possibilities of what streaming can do for you. And the innovation that can happen between the live experience and the digital experience. The thing I think the sports did extremely well was it didn't try to recreate the experience you would have in the arenas and in the sports venues. It came up with something innovative and new. So when you're sitting at home, you can get instant replays, you can get bio pop-ups, you can do people with colorful commentary in your ear, you can draw on the screen. There's so many other ways you can have a visceral experience. And I wonder what would happen if those kind of things were incorporated into our arts going. We also had a hard time capitalizing that. I know a lot of people struggle with the financials of producing good streaming. And I think for many of us, we thought of it as a stopgap, not the future. When we have advances in technology, we usually don't go back. I don't know many people that are using 8-track tapes, and someone gave me a CD last week, and I'm like, can you give me a CD player too? Because I don't have a way of playing it. And so we stepped into the streaming world, and as soon as it became safe to reopen, many of us went right back to what we were doing before, the things that made us vulnerable to consumption of art in public spaces. So I also think that the other lasting impression is that it became really clear that arts organizations have to think more innovatively and entrepreneurially, and they need more business acumen so they can capitalize on the work and commercialize the work that they're doing and not rely so much on contributor revenue. I just saw a recent report, and I can't remember the name of the organization that put out the report, that says arts organizations across the nation are now relying on 75% of their revenues to come from contributions, which means to me that we're in the business of fundraising.
Yeah, and I think, to follow up on that, I think that one of the things the experience of the pandemic, it was kind of, it had a mixed effect. I mean, on one hand, for the public, I think it heightened an awareness of the importance of the arts. There was a recognition of the value of the arts in life, and people did turn to those kind of streaming opportunities, and also felt a great sense of loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're exactly right. There were some arts organizations that recognized that they had to pivot, and they had to, with the performing arts specifically,
Yeah.
had to figure out how to maintain contact with audiences. And some did it quite successfully. We have the example here in Boston of Boston Baroque,
Correct.
that partnered with WGBH and produced high quality performances, and then cut a deal with streaming platforms. But that kind of really embracing of streaming as an alternative way of connecting with audiences really hasn't happened yet. And to your point, I think that whatever happens in the streaming space can't be a mere reproduction of what happens in the face-to-face space.
Yeah, we have to think entrepreneurially, we have to think creatively, and streaming is, in fact, an art form in many ways. What would happen if we saw that as an opportunity and started thinking about all the cool creative things we can do with the digital and the live world? I mean, the ideas are endless. In many ways, I think the arts sector should be leading in that, and we tend to be reactive and try to catch up. And to your point about during the pandemic, people saw the value of arts. Yes, that was true. What didn't happen is that the arts sector, which maybe isn't as strong at organizing like other sectors like healthcare and tech and housing and the gun lobby and all these different tech sectors, the arts sector didn't figure out how to capitalize on people's understanding and realization that they need the arts in their life. We tend to be very social justice minded, but we're not necessarily political, or we don't really engage civically like other sectors. And I think that creates another strain on us, because the value is in the heart and not in the wallet.
Yeah, and I think the dilemma that a lot of arts organizations find themselves in is they operate from the heart, but they don't have the realization that they're also operating as a business. And I really take your point about the need for new business models. The model that has been in place in the nonprofit sector since the 1970s, which is highly dependent on contributions, is not sustainable over the long term, particularly as the number of arts organizations proliferated. There is great possibility and opportunity for nonprofits to operate more effectively as businesses, and there's nothing that keeps nonprofits from operating more effectively as businesses.
Yeah, and in my world, we're seeing the reliance on contributor revenue rise, but we're also seeing philanthropists pull away from the arts and focus more on social services like housing and equity and things like that. And so the math is not gonna math. And so we really don't have an option. And honestly, to me, the nonprofit is a tax status. It's not necessarily a business model, though we approach it as if it's a business model. It is a tax status. And if you think about business in general, you're bringing value to your investors. Sometimes that could be money. So in the for-profit world, investors getting more money back. But in the nonprofit world, those investors are getting a tax break. They're getting all these other benefits. And so the business model should, in many ways, be the same. It's just about how you capitalize that business model. So I just urge, and we've talked about this before, I urge all arts administration, arts management programs to really think about what other business skills can they imbue their students with. I think it's important that anyone getting a degree in art has at least 8 credits of business training before they can graduate with a degree in art, because it is a business. And I get students who are fresh out of college that don't know how to price their art, don't know how to fill out a grant application, don't know how to do their taxes, and that perpetuates this notion that we're not good at business, but also perpetuates this idea that it's okay for us to be starving artists because we chose that. So we own that. We have to own that. What I say to people is put your oxygen mask on first before you help other people. And arts organizations are out there helping all these other people, and they are suffocating.
Yeah. The other thing that I think that happened with the pandemic, and this is a systemic issue in the field, which is there are arts management programs like ourselves that are geared towards building those business skills among arts managers. But the vast majority of people who work in arts organizations essentially learn on the job.
Yeah.
And as you noted, that with the pandemic, about 60% of employees of arts organizations lost their jobs. We've been engaged in a longitudinal study where we're tracing employees at a representative sample of arts organizations in Greater Boston, and that's exactly what we found was that that figure is correct. We've been tracing individuals to see what happened in their careers, and what we found is about 1/3 of them were able to find positions in the arts, although not necessarily in the nonprofit arts.
Mm-hmm.
About 1/3 of them went into other fields, and about 1/3 have chronic unemployment. And so what that's meant is that there's been a tremendous turnover in employment in the sector immediately following the pandemic. And with there's a skills gap.
There are a couple things I want to say, but the overall comment is that that's a huge threat to our sector. We're losing people to other industry. And so I think the people that are putting out the workforce need to pay attention to that. Two, do you know the SNAP study, the Survey of National Arts Alumni?
Yeah.
Project, I think it was called, but they surveyed a bunch of alumni that have degrees, all degrees, terminal degrees. We scored really well on creative thinking, critical thinking, working in groups, but we scored abysmally on business and finance, like really, really low. And I don't think the schools responded to that. We're about to put out information about our mapping and inventory of the state's cultural assets, and we were able to get, through the Americans Community Surveys thing and census, we were able to get the number of artists that work in Massachusetts as full-time artists, and there are 112,000 of them. Doesn't include the people that work for the arts organizations, or doesn't include part-timers. So this is full-time people, meaning they make at least more than half of their income from as an artist. And half of those people make like half of what it takes to make a living wage in Massachusetts. And so that business skill, it will give you more control over your life and your means, but it's scary to us because we just don't know it or don't understand it. So it segregates us. Like it's hard I show up in business meetings and Chamber of Commerce meetings. I'm usually the only arts leader in that room. And I think, so we have to turn that around. It's a cultural thing in the sector. We have to turn it around and see that business is a good thing. Capitalization is a good thing. Commercialization can be a good thing. And also, half of the businesses in the art sector are not nonprofit in this country. And so how are we preparing our workforce if we're only preparing them to not work or to only work in nonprofit?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and one of the things that we see with our graduates is a pretty decent percentage do end up in the commercial sector, working in the arts in one form or another. One of the things that you have been doing as executive director of the Massachusetts Cultural Council, you've been really making a real effort to reach out to other sectors within the Commonwealth, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what your strategic thinking behind that is.
Yeah, sure, we have to. And I think that I'm going to start a new blog at Mass Cultural Council. I think part of that new blog is to really use it as a call to action to the sector. So I hear from arts groups all the time that transportation is a problem for them, housing is a problem for them, not only for individuals, but for organizations, health, climate, all kinds of things. But as I go out to convenings in those sectors, I am typically the only person in the arts in those rooms. In fact, some people even say to me, "What are you doing here?" And I have to remind them at a transportation convening that artists and patrons of the arts use transportation. Or if I'm at a housing meeting, they say, "What are you doing here?" And I'll say, "Well, artists live in houses." So I think people do business with people they know. I don't think the people in those sectors know the art sector and the value that the art sector brings. Maybe they know it in their heart, but they're not thinking about them as a legitimate partner to have. So my call to action to the sector is to get in those rooms, show up in those rooms, operationalize this work in your organizations, because that's going to benefit the whole sector, absolutely will benefit your organization. I think the reason why Mass Cultural Council really is focusing on this now is because our grant dollars just don't stretch that much. When we share this mapping and inventory project, one of the big numbers is that there are more than 15,000 arts organizations in Massachusetts. And then I mentioned that 112,000 individuals, those are full-time people, doesn't include the people that work for the 15,000 organizations, nor does it include the part-timers who might consider themselves professional artists, but they don't make most of their income from the art. And it doesn't include people that work, like you, who work in education, because you're counted in education. So who knows how many people are in the art sector? It could be as many as 500,000. That's a massive sector. And so our grant dollars are not going to stretch that much. This is not a issue I can make my way out of. The median income for a musician in Massachusetts is $28,000. For a dancer and a choreographer, the median income is $7,000. Can't grant make my way out of that problem. We're going to have to develop more business skills, and we're going to have to be more civically engaged so that we let our leaders know they have to pay attention to this very large sector and create cultural policies to support the sector.
One of the things that's kind of a hobby horse for me is when you look at the nonprofit sector, one of the ways in which the business model has developed is it becomes very dependent on early career workers who are paid below market rates for similar work they would be doing in other sectors. And what you see over time is if people are able to sustain a career in the arts, when you get up into upper middle management, executive leadership, it becomes fairly comparable to other sectors. But there is that issue of how do people sustain the career long enough, and what does that mean in terms of the kinds of people who can sustain those careers in the arts, and the way in which arts organizations represent the entire population of the communities they exist in.
Yeah, the externalities of the benefit of the arts, we haven't put money to that yet. And so, yes, people are going to get devalued for their work and get paid less because we just haven't found I talk about the value of the head, the heart, and the wallet. We have the heart, we probably have the head, we just don't have the wallet. People aren't paying what they should be paying artists and arts leaders to do the work that we do that brings, the thing about the arts, to me, there's only one other sector that touches everything and creates a benefit, an external benefit, and that's technology. You can't say that about any other sector. It doesn't really touch every single sector. And so there's a huge value into that. One of the things I've been pushing in the state is this shift from STEM to STEAM. Unfortunately, when STEM was being advocated for 40, 20 years ago, the art sector did not join the STEM world in advocating to add that A. And so we were staying over here in the value and the concept of the A, and they were moving forward with the workforce development program and legislation and infrastructure to really support that. This state has invested $3 billion into STEM, and the benefit to the state is that we're the leading state for STEM in the world, right? So the return on that investment was huge. And had the art sector joined that STEM, we could see a different kind of art sector in Massachusetts. So I'm hoping we can correct that. It's going to be expensive. It may also be emotional to change the reputation of Massachusetts from a STEM state to a STEAM state. But I really want to have the conversation, and I really want the art sector to pivot from thinking of it as a concept and thinking about it as a workforce development program, so that every child that goes through K-12 education in Massachusetts gets exposure to the art. There are so many people that want to go into the field of the arts, but maybe we're not supporting that career trajectory in our K-12 programs. Not only will it benefit the art sector, but we're going to have more creative scientists, more creative technicians, more creative engineers, more creative mathematicians. It should affect the bottom line of arts organizations, because if you get that exposure to the arts, you may become more of an arts patron or an arts donor when you get up. So everyone's going to benefit from the investment into adding that A. It doesn't take away at all from STEM, it only adds. And so that's part of the shift that I think we have to make.
So where you're sitting now and what you want to accomplish there, you also are operating very heavily in the political environment. And one thing that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds in the arts is now we've had a change in administration at the federal level. And what are your thoughts in terms of what kind of political winds will affect the arts in the years to come?
It's hard to say. The one thing I would say is that the leader of our country is an entertainer, and a lot of his wealth has come from the arts, and so I hope he will see the value in that. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing some censorship on the kind of art that is funded on the federal level, but who knows? I mean, it's hard to say. I'm gonna try to. One of the things I think the art sector needs to do is not work only from the reactive place. This is why we have to organize. We've got to organize. We have to start working in the offense so that we can make sure they know that we are here, we're large numbers, we bring a lot to the country's economics, and so we need to be protected, and we need to also think about how we can grow the sector. The one thing I would say is, now that I'm working really cross-sector and trying to work more intentionally on creative economy and cultural policy work, I'm not having resistance from leadership. I'm not having resistance from other sectors. They are welcoming. They're like, great, bring it on. What can we do? How can we work together? Sometimes it moves slowly because we just don't really have those relationships. The resistance I'm having is from the sector itself, who honestly just maybe doesn't want to change anything that they do, but they want the problems to be fixed, but without changing their behaviors. And I think that's where the problem is. There's no way. I don't think that growth of the sector, when it comes to contributions, is going to come from the sector or the usual suspects. My colleague at Mass Cultural Council, Eric Holmgren, says growth of the sector is going to come from those sectors we have outcomes in. So education and health. So we have to build those relationships if we want to be integrated, if we want to have a little bit more sustainability. But the sector has to do something different. I can't fix half the dancers in Massachusetts making less than $7,000. I can't fix that. It has to be everyone working together, and it's going to require us to adaptive leadership and adaptive work on everyone's part. Otherwise, in a few years, we'll be having the same podcast conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that one way in which the sector has gotten better over the years is, as you say, it has been very reactive to political winds. And here in Massachusetts, I think Mass Creative has been a leader in realizing that you can't engage with policymakers at the point at which there's a prospective change that you view unfavorably. You have to engage from the very beginning in an ongoing dialogue.
Yeah, we have to. What we're good at is getting people by their heart, and maybe that's the way in to really pull leadership, political leaders into really tug at their heartstrings. They also respond to numbers, the number of people that are putting pressure on them, and we have a large sector, and the more we show up, the more they will see us. Again, people do business with people they know. I also want to give a shout out to my partners at Mass Creative. They're great partners with us, and we're working more intentionally together to think about creative economy and cultural policy work, because I think that is key to the growth and success of the sector.
So you mentioned technology a while ago.
Yep.
And of course, one of the really major developments in technology in recent years has been generative AI. And it's clearly already having an impact in the field. From where you sit, what do you see going on in the way in which artists and arts organizations are reacting to the emergence of generative AI?
I again, not that generative AI is a crisis, but I also think that people are thinking of it as a crisis. And I think if we flip our brain to think about it as an opportunity, then we can live into that world and take advantage of this cool technology. It's not going to go anywhere. It's going to get better. And so those people that are resisting it are going to be left behind. I am older than Google and Facebook, and I remember the response to those tools when they first came out. People are like, no, we're not going to use social media. We're going to still keep printing, postcards and all this mailing. And I was like, that doesn't make any sense. This is going to be able to reach so many more people. So I think let's live into it. I use it all the time. I mean, I did some notes for this session, and I use ChatGPT, and I have a lot of appearances and keynotes, and I use it to help me draft my thoughts. I also use it to consolidate thinking. I think they're great AI tools, and the efficiency that it can offer, the creativity that it can offer. There is some threat to copyright infringement, and I think we need to address that. But I'm hoping that the art sector can see this not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. And let's go with the flow.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And in our own teaching, we're really seeing that this is a tool that arts managers need to know about and embrace. I teach a course on technology where students are challenged to use generative AI tools to do the kind of work that arts managers do. I mean, in the course of a semester, I hit them with 7 or 8 major projects of the kind of work you need to do as an arts manager, and they were able to navigate those quite successfully.
Yeah, not going anywhere.
Yeah, no, and it's also that it brings different skill sets within the reach of people that you can actually use it as a communicative tool to express ideas that maybe you can't visualize yourself, but you can work with visual designers to clarify what it is you're trying to get across, that kind of thing.
And the capacity of our brains to hold all the things that we maybe are asked to hold is impossible. And so being able to go to those tools and get help to think things. Also, as I think about the innovative needs and entrepreneurial needs we need in the arts sector, that's a tool that may help people think about how they can commercialize or capitalize on their work. So I think it's a good thing. I hope the sector will embrace it. I hope that the copyright and infringement laws come online so that people can be protected. But it's here, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and it does hold promise, I think, for arts organizations, for smaller arts organizations to amplify the work they do beyond what would be their capacity in current circumstances. So that's something that, I think, people worry about job loss, but I think that, the potential for gains and also for developing new business models is huge in comparison to that possible threat.
I think there will be job losses, but I think there will be more job gains from AI. I mean, it's one of the top growing industries that we have, and the world invests in growth industries. So I think anyone that's not incorporating AI into their world are missing out on the potential that it can offer and the potential it's going to have on your bottom line.
Mm-hmm. Now, I know you're a lifelong learner.
Yes.
I know that in your current situation, you're working on an MBA at the same time.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's an essential frame of mind that successful arts managers really need to have. What advice would you have for people who are working in the arts, in the role of an arts manager, in terms of how they can develop the kind of skills they need?
Well, one, I think arts students, arts alum, arts leaders that are hiring artists need to put pressure on universities to change their curriculum to include more business skills in the curriculum. It's vitally important to the workforce and the growth of this industry that people are coming out with a basis of knowledge. I hope people that are in the field, and this may be hard when you are slammed, the money isn't there, and you're holding multiple jobs just to make ends meet. It may be hard to find the resources and the time to continue learning, but it's so important. I believe organizations that are not innovating and people that are not learning are dying as an arts organization, because the world is moving faster and the world is growing, and so if you're not gaining additional skills, you're losing out. I also say to people, take 2 hours a week. Don't watch that one Netflix movie, and take a course. There's YouTube, Google, Coursera, MITx, HarvardX. There are all these different free programs. There are libraries, and so you don't have to actually spend money to learn all these skills. And most of my training has been self-directed learning that I pulled from different sources. The time it takes to acquire a new skill is minimal compared to the benefit you're going to get from that acquisition of skills. So even when I wasn't pursuing formal education, I was always studying and reading and learning and getting mentors and trying new things and being innovative in the work that I've done. Most of the innovation that I've been able to execute in the jobs that I've led have come from not the arts sector, actually. And so to me, it's really important that we are spreading our knowledge beyond what we can learn in the arts.
Yeah, I think we definitely have that philosophy here. So we our program engages with experts in a range of fields. So for example, we work with the Innovate at BU around our course on creative startups. And, as you know, we've started a summer institute for people who are working in the arts to get a really quick, intensive exposure to a number of the critical skills that you really need to succeed. And you've participated in that yourself, and I hope you will again.
Yes, please.
So yeah, I think that the role of education is something that really needs to be stressed, particularly in this time when there's been such a huge turnover in the arts sector. That people who are working as arts managers should be seeking opportunities to develop their skill sets.
Yeah, I think getting to sustainability for this sector really means that none of the models that we have can be considered sacred cows, and they have been for decades and decades and decades. I think we have to look at governance, we have to look at annual budgeting, we have to look at season planning, we have to look at things like subscriptions, we have to look at the way we market, and there are things that we can learn from other sectors, and there are new designs that we can have, and so it requires us to have some exposure to those things so that we see change in those things not as scary, but as a potential to make some of what has been unstable stable.
Absolutely. And I think that's an excellent way to end this conversation.
We could talk for hours.
All right. Michael, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Doug, for having me.
Good.